This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. President Obama is taking drastic measures tonight to erase decades of distance between nations less than 100 miles apart. He has announced the reestablishment of diplomatic relations with Cuba, saying after 5 decades, it is time for a new approach. He will ease restrictions on economic ties and travel. He also secured the release of American hostage Alan Gross, along with a Cuban who spied for the U.S., in exchange for 3 Cubans jailed in Florida. We have Fox team coverage tonight. James Rosen here in the Bureau looks at why 2 nations so close geographically have been so far apart in so many years. But we begin with Chief White House Correspondent Ed Henry and a prisoner swap that's touched off an historic shift in what appears to be President Obama's very own Cuban revolution. Good evening, Ed.
That's right, Brett. It even sounds a little like a spy novel. A secret phone call yesterday between the president and a dictator, and even a clandestine role for the Pope.
Todos somos americanos.
We are all Americans, President Obama declared as a leader struggling all around the world lunged at a legacy item.
I do not believe we can keep doing the same thing for over 5 decades and expect a different result.
And he basked in praise from American aid worker Alan Gross, who stood and thrust his arms in the air when the pilot announced he was out of Cuban airspace, then snacked on popcorn and a corned beef sandwich after 5 years in a Cuban prison.
What a blessing it is to be a citizen of this country. And thank you, President Obama.
While critics declared easing restrictions on dictator Raul Castro sends a dangerous signal.
This is yet another manifestation of the failures of the Obama-Clinton-Kerry foreign policy.
The president, who shook hands with Castro at Nelson Mandela's funeral, sealed this deal with the dictator that led the U.S. to release 3 Cuban spies Tuesday in an Oval Office phone call, as Castro today hailed the new openness.
This decision by President Barack Obama deserves recognition and respect from our people.
The president highlighted the endorsement of Pope Francis, who saw an opening when they met at the Vatican. Then the pontiff followed up with personal letters to both presidents. Mr. Obama stressed Gross was released on humanitarian grounds, and that was somehow not connected to the rest of the deal.
Separately, in exchange for the 3 Cuban agents, Cuba today released one of the most important intelligence agents that the United States has ever had in Cuba.
That claim was rejected even by Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, a Cuban American who declared it was lopsided to release spies in exchange for an innocent American.
It's a fallacy to believe that Cuba will reform because an American president opens his hands and the Castro brothers will suddenly unclench their fists.
And in an interview with ABC News, the president left the door open on a visit to Cuba. Josh Earnest saying that Mr. Obama has seen the very nice climate and that there are a lot of fun things to do. Might wind up there in his final 2 years in office. Brett?
That would be something. Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Many Generation Xers and millennials may find it hard to believe that the U.S. and Cuba were once friendly neighbors. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen tells us what went wrong and why that has not changed until now.
The end of a long, hard-fought campaign. Tyranny overthrown, liberty restored.
When Fidel Castro overthrew the Batista government in Cuba in 1959, the U.S. initially hoped the bearded revolutionary would become an ally and courted him assiduously. But Castro cast his lot with the Soviet Union and enacted Stalinist repression at home. President Eisenhower in October 1960 responded with a partial economic embargo on Cuba,
Cuban people have not yet spoken their final piece,
which John F. Kennedy expanded to a total embargo. Indeed, well into the 1990s, Congress, under the Helms-Burton Act, and successive presidents moved to tighten the grip further, barring U.S.-owned subsidiaries from doing business in Cuba and otherwise restricting foreign investment on the island.
This policy is a vestige of the Cold War. It certainly closed the door on any U.S. economic investment. It made it hard for people to travel. Each one of these had as its long-term goal to try and push the regime in Cuba to open itself up. And as President Obama said today, it's been a failed policy. None of these acts have in fact done anything to open the regime up.
I do believe that we can move U.S.-Cuban relations in a new direction.
Twice in his first term, President Obama took executive action to liberalize American travel to Cuba. Even today, however, the State Department's annual human rights report categorizes the Cuban regime as authoritarian, guilty of just about every abuse you can think of, each one on this list against Cuba's citizens. The Obama administration and its conservative critics swiftly clashed over the likely ramifications of the president's decision to engage the Castro regime and upend a policy that has spanned 11 administrations.
You know the old saying, if you dig in a hole and you're getting deeper and deeper, stop digging.
If I were an American adversary now in Moscow, in Tehran, in Pyongyang, I would be saying 2 more years of the Obama administration, I'm going to present my wish list because I think I can get it from this weak president.
President Obama said he's under no illusion that the changes announced today will bring about an overnight transformation of Cuban society, and senior aides acknowledged they'll have to continue to raise human rights issues with the government of Raul Castro. Brett?
Our resident historian, James Rosen. James, thanks.
You bet.
Let's get more reaction to the Cuba story now from a very interested party. Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio is son of Cuban immigrants who left the country a few years before the Castro Revolution. Senator Rubio, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
First of all, let me ask you, from the administration's point of view, 5 decades of these sanctions have not worked to change the dynamic on the ground in Cuba. Why is this the wrong move?
Well, first of all, we have to have a fundamental understanding of the purpose of the embargo in the 21st century. In the 20th century, it had to do with the Cold War. They were an ally of the Soviet Union, in fact, almost brought the world to the brink of World War III. But in the 21st century, the purpose for these sanctions is called leverage. We need something as leverage to negotiate with a successor to the Castro regime a democratic opening in Cuba, which is my sole interest. I think a free and democratic Cuba gives its people the right to choose any economic model they want. The president has given away much of that leverage in exchange for nothing.
But what exactly, did you see any evidence that anything was changing in Cuba with the scenario as it was? Status quo?
Well, let me tell you, they were under increasing pressure, and that's why they're so desperate to get these sanction reliefs in place. The Venezuelan government and economy is collapsing. That's what's been a lifeline to the Cuban government after the fall of the Soviet Union. And then 2 things have happened. The Obama administration comes in and relaxes travel to Cuba, which is a source of hard currency. They increase remittances onto the island, which the government takes a cut of. Every time an American or a Cuban American gets on an airplane and flies to Cuba, the government charges exorbitant fees, so it's a big money maker. That's what's allowed them to maintain themselves in power. And now these additional concessions, full diplomatic relations, increased commerce, increased banking, increased telecommunications cooperation. We're going to remove them from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. In exchange for all those concessions, what Barack Obama got was, for the people of Cuba, was the release of 53 political prisoners who can be in jail again next week if they join up with democracy activists, and the promise that the United Nations will be allowed to monitor events in Cuba more closely. What's going to happen here is this now provides the hard currency and the economic progress that the government needs to make the conditions there. Now they can go through permanent. Now they can go through a succession plan, not fearing that in any way will undermine their grip on the island.
What about this trade-off? And you know, they put Alan Gross separately, but Alan Gross coming home, a U.S. intelligence asset not named coming home. I assume you think that that's a good thing?
Well, yes, I think it's a good thing that Alan Gross is home. He never should have been in jail to begin with. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a hostage. He did nothing wrong. Interesting point I want to raise. The president today said that Cubans on the island are not allowed advanced telecommunication tools because of the embargo. That is categorically false. They don't have advanced telecommunication tools because it's illegal in Cuba. That's why Alan Gross was taken hostage, because he was helping the Jewish community in Cuba have access to the internet. Now let me back up and say this. If today we would have been presented with this scenario that said they sent the 3 spies to Cuba and in exchange they got back a U.S. intelligence asset, I would be concerned about it, but I wouldn't be on your program. I mean, I'm here today because of the relief and sanctions against Cuba.
This is a historic shift.
It is the most historic thing that's happened in the relationship with Cuba since 1961. But in my mind, it sets back democratic progress. Put yourself for a moment in the place of an activist, a dissident on the island of Cuba who has made it their life's purpose to condemn what the Castro regime is doing. And now here comes the U.S. under Barack Obama and basically embraces that government and has said, and in return for this embrace, we're not asking them to treat you any better. Tomorrow morning, political opponents of the Castro regime will be just in as much trouble as they are today. And that's not going to change because of these sanctions. In the country, it's going to make it harder.
You know this issue splits Congress. You have Democrats siding with you, like Senator Bob Menendez, but others, Republicans, like Jeff Flake, side with the administration here. Here's what he said.
For those who say that this is a concession somehow to the Cuban regime, these moves that are being made today, I think that that is the wrong way to look at it. That is simply wrong. My sense is that that most of my colleagues feel we are long past due. 50 years. 50 years. And so I think that the politics are good. Certainly the policy is right, and good politics usually follow.
Your reaction to that?
It has nothing to do with politics. I don't care if 99% of the people in America think we should lift sanctions. I would still be against it. Because my interest is not politics when it comes to Cuba. It is freedom and democracy for the Cuban people, who deserve to be able to elect their leaders just the same way we do and every other nation in the hemisphere does. And I think this is counterproductive.
But did you sense that that was changing? Anything was changing? The dynamic was changing?
No, it's getting worse. And it's getting worse because of some of the things the president has done. For example, as I went back to, now they're allowing all these groups to take cultural trips to Cuba. These cultural trips to Cuba are nothing but tourism. And this tourism is putting hard currency in the hands of the Cuban regime, who then turn around and use that to enrich the military that controls the island, but also to fund their repressive apparatus. This Sunday, the ladies in white, as they do every Sunday, will leave Mass and, dressed in white, walk down the street silently to protest the Cuban government, and they will be beaten, they will be spit on, some of them will be jailed, their loved ones are already in jail. How is any of this going to change that? This idea that somehow because now there's going to be more American products sold in Cuba, democracy is going to spring, is absurd.
You mentioned Mass. The Vatican was intimately involved in this, according to the White House, and the Pope facilitated, essentially, these secret talks for about a year. What is your message to the Vatican, to Pope Francis?
My understanding is the Vatican was involved in getting the release of Alan Gross. And I have no objection with Alan Gross coming home to the United States, and that's the role of a spiritual leader.
But you don't sense that they were involved in the talk about lifting and
that I know of, no. But I would just say this, and I said this earlier today, I would also encourage the Pope to take up the call of democracy and freedom. I think the people of Cuba deserve democracy every as much as the people of Argentina do, or the people of Brazil do, or every other nation in the hemisphere. How come Cubans are less worthy of freedom than all these other countries in the region?
What are you going to do about it now? The White House says they have the money because there's an interest section already there, that they're not worried about money for appropriations for an embassy. What about the ambassador? Are you going to hold up a potential U.S. ambassador to?
It's going to be a very interesting hearing the day they come to my office and my chairmanship of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee and ask us to move on an ambassador nominee to Cuba. I don't think we should be sending ambassadors to repressive regimes like this. In some instances, because of geopolitical realities like China, we have to deal with it. But that's an example. China is a country that has full economic relationships with the United States. American products flood that market and vice versa. It's no more free today than it was in the early 1970s.
So you call this a sad day?
It's a terrible day for democracy. It's a sad day for those that want freedom and liberty for the Cuban people. Today is a dramatic step in the direction of the Cuban regime becoming a permanent fixture that we'll be asked to accept forever. It's a terrible day for freedom.
Senator, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Up next, breaking news about cyber terrorists with a deadly serious threat against you and your family over a movie that's supposed to be funny. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Boston, where 14 owners or employees of a Massachusetts pharmacy have been charged in connection with a meningitis outbreak that killed 64 people nationwide in 2012. Prosecutors said the suspects sold tainted steroids that caused fungal meningitis and other illnesses. Fox 4 in Kansas City, where a school has taken away the cane of a blind 8-year-old boy. Bus driver says the boy hit another student with it. The blind boy was given a swimming pool noodle instead. His parents say the school officials are trying to humiliate their son. And this is a live look at Los Angeles from Fox 11, our affiliate out there. One of the big stories there, a mudslide shutting down a part of the Riverside Freeway this morning. At least 5 vehicles were trapped as the debris came down from a recently burned area of a hillside. It took almost 2 hours to get the vehicles out of that area. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.